All right, loves, we're here. Welcome to Practice Live. This is a monthly broadcast where we drop into what it takes to really actually be here. I've come through with a lens of practice for many years. I've had a daily practice since I was 17, and up until last Saturday, which was day 3,700 of painting every day. I have done exactly that, regardless of the outer conditions. And something softened, and we'll probably get into that in this call because it's really related to the work that I've been doing with Drea, who is my special guest today. And it's such an honor to have you. I encountered you through Instagram or some shit like 3 years ago, and felt something in the way that you occupy space that I knew was relevant to me. And it took me a little while to court that level of expansion. That my sense is that you've always had that, but you've also like worked on it. And yeah, and then when it was time to make the leap to be in direct community with you, like everything reassembled. Because of the self-initiation and also because of the space that you hold. It's such an honor to have you here. I'm really excited for those who join us live and for those who watch the replay to hear through the frequency of your voice and to witness how you move in conversation, what's going to come through today, because this feels like a prophetic space.
Yeah.
This feels like a moment where we need access to those who have oracular or prophetic voice and foresight. And you are somebody that I know has that. And you're also like, somehow your zeal is not like packaged in urgency or crisis. A lot of your direction is really like landed in how you are. So I'm pumped, like in the most like collected way that I can muster in this moment to have you here for this call. And again, for the encountering of what's going to come through, because both of us were talking before hopping on here. I will actually turn it over to you momentarily. Both of us were talking on here momentarily ago about how this space of Practice Live really isn't like a come prepared with your speech. Yeah. It's really a space of encounter and not perfection, and yet like the most gorgeous things come through when we allow ourselves to just show up and trust the process. So in that spirit, it's my pleasure, it's my honor to hand the mic over to you, Drea. I would love to hear a little bit about what's important for us to know about you. That can be your background, but it can really be about the now. Whatever you're called to share is completely welcome.
Yeah. My goodness. I'm just going to take a pause and just receive all of that. Thank you. Thank you for, first of all, the invitation to be here. You and I have a really amazing synergy in that even in the spaces that we're in together, whenever you pose questions or ask, it always catalyzes really interesting, honestly, channeling from my end. So I'm also very, very excited to see how this conversation goes. But just thank you so much for everything, and what a grounding space already. The non-perfection and being present. It's very you, and I already immediately feel a lot is gonna come through in a non-prepared way, because I was telling Meg how so I guess one of the first things that is important to know about me is that I am very pregnant. I'm well into my late third trimester. So I have a few weeks left of gestation, but with that comes interesting nights in that we don't get a ton of sleep. So there was not a lot of like cognitive preparation on my end, but I think this is actually better because I think whenever I'm present and asked things, it's very real. It's very true with what comes through. So thank you for allowing that space. Aside from being pregnant with my second human child, I have also birthed recently I'll call it a brand. Energetically, I know it's way more than that, but the magic in all of this and why I think it's important to know because I think it's going to play into the conversation for today, which is that the human and this brand Stellium were conceived pretty much I mean, dare I say the same day, but definitely within the same time frame. And Stellium had its formal launch this past weekend. So one of the twins is birthed. It's out in the earth wild, and I have a human that is waiting to be birthed. But I think it is important to say that because there's a lot of magic that happened with that, and I think is very much a part of how I kind of see the matriarchal lens of creation, which we're going to get into, I'm sure, has really like shaped my current reality. Outside of that, I myself was raised by a very strong grandmother matriarch. So speaking of kind of just the matriarchal leadership, it's something that I believe I was initiated in very early on, maybe even before I think my soul agreed to it. There were some agreements that kind of like happened for that to kind of play out, but it's a big part of my background, my experience. So now, at a little over 40 years old, to now take what I saw back then and then to apply it into a business lens and just a life lens has been really interesting. Outside of that, I mean, there's more to the dimensions. That's me, but I think I'll pause there, and I'm sure as we continue talking, more will come out.
Ooh, yep. There was something that shimmered about, and I've heard you talk about this before, and this is like not even something that necessarily needs sussing, except I think it does actually. Like birthing brands. There was
Mhm.
something about combining birth and business. Um, Maybe you have more to say on that about like the parallels
Yeah.
of because when you were talking about the like you're like in these last few weeks of, gestation, I was like, man, even though I haven't had a child go to that point, I have felt that the like I know it's coming. There's still mystery. There's still room for complete unknown, same as mystery, but like I guess I'm like naming sort of a human end of that. It's like there's like the spiritual end of mystery and there's also like the human end of mystery. You know it's coming. It's uncomfortable. It's stretchy. It's pressury. All of the things. But there was something that shimmered when you said birthing with
Mhm.
the brand. And I
Mm.
feel like I would love for that to be our portal,
Yeah, yeah.
our birth canal into this conversation around you're welcome. Matriarchal, like what is it? What is matriarchal leadership? Like
Yeah.
what is that? And how is birthing our businesses related?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we're diving in. Okay. So let me start by giving a little bit of context because I feel this will help shape the conversation a little bit better. But I've always used the analogy, to me, it's a perfect analogy, the gestation and the birth, the conception, gestation, and birth when it comes to uh, launching a brand. I'm very much obviously in the business arena, but there was something so uniquely parallel about the two that felt especially for this particular brand. So I've prior to this, I founded Soulflow Co., which I've been doing for years, and then last year was the signal, was the call, this consciousness, this new entity that dropped, which was not quite Soulflow Co., which ended up being Stellium. But even that, I think, was and I talk about brands as an entity because I do believe that there is a specific energy tied to the brands that we create, the businesses that we create. I mean, obviously, it has its own astrology, but I think even the conception of it requires a certain level of readiness. And I'll even go back because I think this is relevant, but uh, I have a history of cancer, and so fertility was not I mean, it's not guaranteed for anyone, but fertility was kind of a big question for me. So to even have had two pregnancies is kind of a big deal, without having had done the medical interventions to kind of like, make things happen and incubate and things like that. But I think there was a readiness that happened for both the brand and the human to come through. And last year, summertime was the time where I took a sabbatical. I call it tomato break. This was a little bit of a joke that started off with one of my mentors, and she had said something along the lines of, imagine the things that you can create if you just had like the space for it. And I was like, if only I could just take 3 months off and just did nothing and just planted tomatoes, that would be like the dream. And she, as any amazing mentor would, challenge me. And she said, well, why wouldn't you? Why not now? And I was like, yes, yes. So I went into tomato break. I took the summer off for sabbatical. I went to New York City. It was like a pre-planned trip. And in that trip, it was like a really big activation for me, somatically, energetically, spiritually, that it was just this aliveness that I felt. And I was walking through the streets of like Soho, and I used to live in New York for like a few years, and it's been a while since I've been back, and just feeling the energy, the aliveness, it did something to me. And there was that in partnership with the season of life that I was with my partner, where we were really energetically in tune with each other. I think all of that combined just led to this dropping awareness of like, okay, I'm going to sunset Soulflow Co. I'm going to create this new thing. And it has a really audacious energy. It's a Leo energy. So she's very, wants the stage, very speedy, very audacious, very bold. And I felt super intimidated by it, which is really interesting because it's of me. And yet the spirit of this brand, of this entity, was very like, I choose you. And I was like, are you sure? Are you sure? It was not like, oh my God, amazing, this feels so good, it's great. There was a lot of like, fuck, like, can we swear? We could swear. Okay. It was like, fuck, like, am I ready for this? Like, it felt in a way like getting drafted to the war. Because part of me was like, this is big and I don't know if I want to do it. So for a while, I really had to sit with it, right? But that idea kind of like dropped then, and I'm pretty sure that same night I conceived, because there was that like readiness to receive. And so going back to the question of birthing a brand, it's so parallel to birthing a human because there is a process to it. And a lot of the spaces that I lead, it's a 9-month long space for a reason, because it honors the gestation time of 9 months. I mean, technically we have 4 trimesters, right? But like the 3 where the baby is still within us, the first trimester, it was horrible, horrible, horrible for me. You can't tell I'm pregnant. So it was very much this kind of like, I was feeling the nausea, I was feeling the fatigue, everything smelled like onions, like I couldn't stand my husband, or like all the hormonal things, all the internal things. It's the most fragile part of the gestation period, because we could very easily at that point, it's not a promise that the term is going to go full term, or the baby's going to go full term. But I think it's the same with like birthing a brand, because it's very fragile there, those first few moments when you think of it, because there's moments where you're going to question yourself. There's moments where you're going to feel like, is this too big for me? Am I ready? Oh my gosh, this is going to change. All the questions, all the rearranging hormonally in your DNA, somatically, everything changes and rearranges in that first trimester. So it's very, very similar. And as I was doing both for the brand and the baby, the twins, it was so I laughed because I was like, man, this is literally the same thing. It was like, it felt like such a fragile moment where I really needed to nourish the idea of birthing this brand. And also at the same time, I really had to nourish myself to ensure that I would get over that, 3-month hump or whatever they recommend, right? And then the second trimester, which is the next 3 months, the energy comes back. I feel more like myself. Things weren't smelling like onions, like food was more palatable. And I think like that is when, like, as the journey of like incubating a brand happens, you're more comfortable with the idea. There's more acceptance. There's more, okay, our life is going to change, things are going to be different. And so now we start to kind of like take action towards it. And then now in this last trimester, we're just big. We're just waddling around, waiting for things to kind of like pop through. We do the necessary preparations, of course, but it was the same thing with like birthing the business. But the thing is, with the birth, that's just like the start, right? That is just the beginning of it. Now we got to keep this thing alive. And that is the same with any brand or business. Is now that it's been launched, now that it's out in the world, how do we sustain it? How do we nourish it? How do we keep it healthy? How do we keep it alive? So again, right, the parallels, at least in my matriarchal lens, they're one and the same, very, very similar. And I think the more we understand that and don't get caught up in the, well, it should be this way, or, per protocol or per best practices. I mean, it's great to have those things, but I think everyone gestates differently, everyone conceives differently. So the more we honor and acknowledge our own pregnancies, because every pregnancy is different, is it the one, the more enjoyable it gets to be, and two, I think the more receptive we are to what truly wants to come through, both on the baby side and the brand side.
Rad. There's a bajillion things you just touched on, but I noticed that no, it had an arc. That had sequence. That was good. There's two things that I feel like are deeply relevant to matriarchal leadership that I want to pull out.
Yeah.
One is like sabbatical
Yeah.
and rest.
Right. Okay. I realize I didn't answer that question from earlier. So let me get into it now. Okay. So matriarchal leadership, and listen, there's so many definitions out there. I'm going to work with what I know is embodied for me, and what feels really true for me, and kind of a little bit of like what I'm seeing as shifting. But if I were to have a little summary of matriarchal leadership, I'll start with what I think it's not, just to give a little bit of contrast, because I think that helps. So what it's not is the older paradigm of, I'll just use the word kind of like the trad wife, like, where I'm just gonna like stay home and like cook the thing. And again, there's nothing, if that is what you desire, that is amazing. But I'm saying there's also this persona that we are also being fed, which is like the matriarch looks like your role is solely at home, and you are responsible for these things. I don't necessarily think that's true for everyone. And for the ones that want scope beyond that, I think that gets to be very matriarchal as well. It's also not this idea of like fuck the patriarchy and fuck men, and it's to me, the way I see matriarchal leadership is very much acknowledging the role of the 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 masculine energies. So the structure, the discipline, the ambition. Uh, what we're doing differently is we're counteracting that and counterbalancing that, I should say, with things like rest and nourishment and knowing, like, satiability, right? Knowing like this is enough. And therefore kind of calling a more sustainable quality to leadership. So going back to your point of sabbatical and rest, it is a very matriarchal thing in that if I were to think about it, like it's how we operate. So a lot of like how leadership or at least business leadership has operated has been very much on the male biology clock, which is the 24-hour hormonal cycle, right? That's how the industrial kind of period modeled our day to day. So the whole like 9 to 5 is because that's when the men's hormones naturally peak. And so to harvest the most productive days of the man, business was done from like 9 to 5. Now, from a woman that wants to now fit into this, it may not always fit because our cycles, our hormones are not on a daily. It's, generally speaking, every 30 days. And so we naturally have periods of up and down seasons and cycles. So to really talk about matriarchal leadership is to not bypass that truth, but to use that as a strategy. Is understanding that when I work with the cycles and the seasons, and listen, this is not just specific to it's not a biology or a gender thing, right? But energetically, some of us flow with more feminine cycles and things like that, and seasons. But even to acknowledge like the sabbatical, that was like it was time for me to just take a break and take time off and rest. Sure, there were parts of me that was a little bit nervous about it, that resisted it. But I think ultimately it's what allowed me to gestate a human and a brand, to make a huge pivot, and in a lot of ways, like, grow. And I think that to me is one of like the biggest like defining moments of like how I was like initiated into like true matriarchy, is like knowing like this is going to be part of my life now. The I have like 14 weeks of PTO allotment per year doesn't quite fit uh, how I flow and how I am optimized and designed. I'll argue that's not just for me, it's for everyone really. But I think like that's the matriarchal difference, is having that counterbalance. So it's not for a lack of all the beautiful masculine traits. It's taking those traits and also knowing, are there counterbalances and complements that we can put in place, all for the name of longevity, sustainability. Are we regenerative? Are we life-giving? That gets to be the question that we ask, not just the question of, is this going to work for me from a business side? Is this going to be profitable? Is this going to put me at the top of my game? All valid questions, and I think questions that deserve to be asked. we're just saying it's not just that criteria that we're working with. We're kind of like more integrative and more full spectrum with how we ask ourselves those questions.
Those last bits. I mean, all of that, but like those last bits. Yes, right. Part of matriarchal leadership is that this is part of me now. This is part of my life now. It's not just a novel truth that's passing through. It's woven into everything of how I'm being. There's something really exciting to me about that, because that really has a lot to do with sustainability. And that last piece of like, not just asking, how does this impact me, and how does this position me, and what does this do for my life or my business? Also, in addition, asking, is this life-giving?
Yeah.
And matriarchal leadership moves. A mentor and friend has said these words, which I really love, and I use them a lot in my copy, which is like, in service to all involved, ourselves included. And yeah, that
Yeah,
sets a different standard for how we're approaching anything that we're doing.
absolutely. And even in the terminology in the business world, a lot of people love to use like empires, building empires. I'm not a fan of that word. It's giving kind of dominion and domination and uh, hierarchy, and I'm kind of like building on like acquisition, acquiring more and more and more, right? As the empire grows, we're acquiring more to the detriment of the humans that we acquire. I like to think of it, and the word I like to use is ecosystem, because that's really what it is. It's we can't have dominion and acquisition without affecting something else. So obviously, the most straightforward example is in nature, right? Ecosystems are so delicate in that if you have too much of a certain predator, it throws everything off. Um, in business and maybe in humanities and in leadership, perhaps it's the same thing. To have an awareness. And it's not to say that we're going to be perfect about it, because that's another trap that we fall into, is like, I can't possibly know all the outcomes. And so to get stuck in that is also very paralyzing, and we're not about that, right? But it is a little bit of like a consciousness and a mindfulness and a questioning and a curiosity of what kind of impact downstream will this certain action have. So I think part of matriarchal leadership is not just short-term gratification, but it's also asking the questions that really pull the threads on longevity. And, how does this affect the rest of the ecosystem? And I think the more we're practiced in asking that question, uh, and again, it's not to be perfect, but it's really to just be exercised in saying, okay, it's not just about like acquiring for the sake of acquiring. It's knowing that this is infrastructure that we're building very intentionally.
Beautiful. Yeah, not perfection, mindful curiosity, and what impact downstream will this action or choice have? I have a little arc that I want to drop into that relates to a question that arose in response to an earlier point that you made. It actually also relates to this. I'm going to go a little abstract and it will come back. um, something I have thought a lot about and I've talked a lot about recently, as I've been a student of desire. I've been a student of asking myself, what do I want? And asking others, what do you want? It's actually a teaching that has been held in Mi'kmaq Nation that I learned from an elder teacher that I worked with for 8 years, as a teaching of kindness, that it's a kindness to know what you want. And that the first questions have to do with that, with you knowing what you want, not what can I do for you. A lot of people in the current Western context think of kindness in terms of, what I can do for you. It's conflated with niceness and it's conflated with specific actions. And I heard recently somebody say, I can't remember where, which is why I'm being a little abstract about it, but I heard recently somebody say something like, a person who doesn't know what they want is dangerous.
Mm,
And
mm,
I actually agree. I really actually deeply agree with that. I feel
mm,
like if we do not have access to the signal of desire, we're actually outside of the range of being in relationship with bigger bodies. I
mm,
consider bigger bodies to be Earth, God or the divine, the ancestors and unseen kin, but also our direct community.
mhm,
And callings are often coming in response to the desires of the collective.
mhm,
So to be in tune with the signal of knowing what you want, like knowing why an idea is coming to you, right? You're on an escalator and all of a sudden you see a bunch of people like gathered in a speakeasy format, like reorganizing the future. This is from Drea's actual vision. I'm sorry, I'm using your story, but like
yes.
that's that's a signal, right? It's like you received that signal, you had access to it, you were able to like assemble yourself around it a little bit. And then you asked yourself, really? Me? Can I do this? Do I want to do this? So like navigating with that signal then moves us into calling. So the second question of the first teaching of kindness is to ask yourself, what am I willing to do? What am I willing to do in response to what I
Yeah,
want? What am I willing
yeah.
to do for it? And that's a clarifier, you know,
Mm,
like I want to be popular. Am I willing to like dress the same as everybody else in order to fit in?
mm,
No. Okay. Like I want financial freedom. Okay. Am I willing to learn what the game is now and not what the game was 50 years ago?
mhm,
Okay. I want to work for myself. Okay. Are you ready and willing to invest in contexts where you can expand your self concept to be with people who are not better than you? They're not necessarily cooler than you. They haven't necessarily, they're not done.
yeah.
Like, but they have figured out a piece and they're in a space of transmission about something that, you want access to. You actually need to initiate yourself into that space. Are you willing to initiate yourself into that space? So, what do I want? What's the signal? What am I willing to do? Which for me moves into an energy of callings.
Mm,
Callings get moved in our current Western context into the machine of how productive and how useful it is for the
mm,
machine. And our creativity gets killed by that. Community gets killed by that. Thought leadership that's innovative, that doesn't necessarily obviously fit into like what's acceptable to think or to do, gets killed by that. What am I willing to do? I'm willing to audaciously step at this size that I have nervous system capacity for stretching into. Okay, that's point two. Point three, to me, those two things of signal moving into calling lead to destiny. And a lot of the current Western context thinks of destiny
mm,
from the stance of personal destiny.
mm,
Yes. And to me, destiny is cohort.
mm,
Destiny is beginning to ask ourselves, how does this action, how does this choice impact downstream? What is the impact of how I am choosing to shape my business with the values that I have? What is the lateral impact of that? Like, what is
mm,
that? How is that serving the community around me? How is this like participating with the bigger bodies?
mhm,
And for me, that has been like the rubric in which I'm measuring my right relationship. I'm like, now we can get overly meticulous in that. And part of what I'm loving about this conversation is that we're really leaning on practice, the imperfection. Like it's not, I'm done, I have it all together at all. It's, I'm focused in this direction and I'm going in this direction so that I can really lean into that energy of destiny and be with my cohort, leading. Anyway, that was my abstract roundabout leading back to a thing that I heard you touch on at the beginning, which is that when we ask ourselves, am I sure? Are you sure? Are you sure, life? Are you sure, God? Are you sure that you want me to be the one to usher this forward?
yeah.
Am I ready? The feeling of being drafted, this the bigness and not sure if we want to actually do that. Something I have known with myself and have also deeply encountered and heard from you, your thought leadership around this, is that I've heard you say readiness is a choice and not a feeling, and that expansion doesn't feel good. And I would love to hear your musings around how expansion doesn't feel good. What do you have for that for us?
Absolutely. It's interesting, I think, especially in the times of social media, where expansion is kind of glorified and really pedestaled and showcased in a way where I'm showing you the fruit, but not the labor. And so what expansion could look like, optically, is a bigger house or more money. I mean, it doesn't have to be material, right? But like more freedom, more time freedom, things like that. And I think what is not being shown more granularly is the labor that requires to bear the fruit. That is what expansion is. And so it's really interesting because like whenever I think of like matriarchy, really, I think of grandma, where she was born the first daughter of 12 siblings. She didn't choose it. She was thrusted into this role, and she had to be stewards for her younger siblings. I didn't have an appreciation for it growing up, but now that I have my own kids, I'm like, it's so much easier to not have to do that shit. Like, I have to be responsible for 2 human lives. It's daunting. It's in a part, and any parent, parts of me is like, sometimes I'm like, what did we do? What did we do? Uh, so to have all of the feelings and to question the bigness and to even question expansion, because listen, our nervous systems, our brains are not wired for bigness. They're not wired for expansion. They're wired for safety. They're wired for comfort, which is why it is so difficult to get the signal, understand the desire, and actually walk the talk, because it often requires a repatterning, a re an upgrade of an operating system, a breaking of patterns, a breaking of cycles. And all of these are not always conscious. Dare I say, a lot of them are subconscious. And so to say yes to expansion, to say, yes, I want to expand, is not just saying yes to the fruit, it's saying yes to the labor, which often means we're repatterning. We are surfacing operating systems that when I tell you about them, you're probably not going to like it. And not just that, when you start to operate a different way, you're going to hate me a little. You're going to fight me a little bit, and you're probably going to hate me a little bit. And all of that, I think, is part of what really creates true expansion, not in a how do I want to word it? Hollow way, because there is expansion that is shiny and great optically, but internally it's not either real or true or landed or grounded. So if the goal is to have the expansion that is real, that is true, it's going to require a slowing down. It's going to require a noticing of like, wow, this is the pattern that I have been repeating, or these are habits that I keep doing. Here's the stories that I keep looping in, and giving you the opportunity to slow it down and pause and repattern a lot of that. So that was the expansion. And then you had another question about, remind me again.
I can't remember it all.
Okay.
I'm
Oh,
so
oh,
I'm
being ready, like readiness, readiness.
yeah, go for it.
Okay, okay. So, as someone who talks a lot about like somatic feelings, I know it can be a little bit counterintuitive to say like readiness is not a feeling, it's a decision. What I do want to say about this is that feelings are real, but they're also they're quick. They come and we feel it somatically. It's the interpretation of the feeling that really leads to the decision that we make. So just because we do not, quote, feel ready, and that feeling could be a feeling of anxiety, it could be a feeling of fear, it could be it's a momentary somatic reaction. We have to know, like, am I interpreting these set of signals, these somatic signals, as a I'm not ready decision? That's the difference. And when I say to readiness is a decision, it's landing even after all the feelings have been felt. You landing at a place that says, amidst all of that, and there's going to be a lot of questions, right? Am I ready? Oh my God, this is too big. Holy shit, really? Like all of those things will come. And when the time comes, and I've said this to you, Meg, a couple of times, like it's often when you are not really thinking about it, but the clarity cuts through. There's a clarity that cuts through, and you're like, this is it. I'm ready. And whenever clients come to me, and Meg, you've done this a couple of times, whenever they come to me and they're like, I'm ready for this, I'm all like, okay, we're going, because that to me is not a I'm convincing you you're ready, I'm coaching you to feel ready, I'm, we're dancing so that you have all the endorphins that make you feel ready, but really you're not. It's a landed, clear, grounded space, and it's a decision, ultimately decision, because I say sometimes the brain lags from the body, right? Or the spirit. And so this is a very congruent decision where the mind, the body, the spirit is all in congruence. And it's like, yeah, bitch, boop, 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 boop. Like we're ready. That is to me the kind of readiness that is fuel backed. That is, it's the makings of quantum leaps. It is you could say whatever you want to say. I'm not phased. I'm not phased because there is an internal decision and yes, um, that is not swayed externally. So some people call this like imposter syndrome. They call it like confidence or whatever. It's like, it's because the internal signal of readiness has not been decided congruently. And so there's parts of us that are still wobbly. So again, are there going to be, wobbles in the future? Yeah, of course, because we're human. But that first, the readiness, the clarity, the groundedness, it's very much like so to talk about the escalator, right? When the stellium thing idea happened, I was literally on an escalator and I was holding a hat, some pants, and like a belt. And I was like down the escalator and it like struck me and I saw it so quick. I was like, it was like red, velvet, wax sealed envelopes, speakeasy, intimacy. It was like, it all was like right there. And in that moment, there was a readiness to the extent where I went to my husband and I was like, I'm going to sunset Soulflow Co. and I'm creating something new. And I never looked back since. 2 weeks before that, even suggest me sunsetting Soulflow Co., I will fight you because the readiness was not there. So how's that?
Oh. Okay. I'm cool. I'm cool. You touched on a thing that I want to hear more about in a bigger context, which is matriarchal leaders. You and I talked about this before this call. How do I summarize this? It has to do with acknowledging and not bypassing the current dumpster fire situations that are happening, and also dumpster fire, and also
Yeah.
and also in addition, um, you put out a call for more of us
Mhm,
who have the capacity to be
mhm,
situated in
mhm,
in the in the qualities that lead to actually like really being here. And
mhm,
not just being here, but actually enjoying being here. Like life gets to be good
mhm.
amidst collective crisis. I want to hear more from you about that. I want to hear more from you about that.
This is the thing I think about leadership, specifically matriarchal leadership, that mm, it's an interesting place to be, and it's a very lonely place to be, in that it requires us to hold a lot of different paradoxes and truths simultaneously. So in this case, there is a fucking big truth that like things are burning. And I will say, I feel like we knew this was happening. For those of us that know, kind of understood that like shit's kind of crumbling. The systems that we've put in place before are just not working anymore. Working for a few people, right? But like for the collective and for our sustainable evolution is not working. Um, and so this is where I kind of like said it. It's the changing of the guards, because it almost feels like in a time where we were operating in this one way, it's getting replaced with a new paradigm altogether, a brand new operating system altogether. And so that's really what I mean by like, there's a changing of the guard. And the guard, I use that intentionally because we're stewards of the paradigm. We're stewards of the collective history and time. So by guards, I mean like all of us. And so if the guards that, you know, kind of like upheld these systems before are trying so hard to keep it up and erect and alive, there's so many more of us that understand the truth that like it's time. We're expired. That's expired. It's time for something new and something different. And so I get always distracted. So the question was, remind me again one more time.
Well, let's continue with this thread of like, what does it look like to you for matriarchs to be resourced
Oh,
in order
yes.
to show,
Thank
right?
you.
Okay, good.
Okay,
You're
okay,
smart.
I'm back. I'm back. Okay. So the fact that it is a requirement for us to be able to hold paradoxes, multiple truths at the same time, also means that yes, while there's a lot of really shitty things that are going on in the world, we can also simultaneously feel at peace, feel abundant, and feel gratitude for the life that we have. I mentioned earlier, I'm a cancer thriver, and it was like the opposite, in that like in a time where all of my friends and family were celebrating birthdays and weddings and pregnancies and births, I was losing my fucking hair. And to really get thrusted into this, like the world continues to spin while you're hurting, is a truth. It is a universal truth. So now where we're seeing like the world, it's a little bit opposite. And then like the most of the world, so many of us are hurting and in this place of like crisis, right? There are going to be some of us who are going to feel really, really resourced, maybe because we have done some pre-work, whether we know it or not, whether because we're choosing to be like, okay, I'm gonna try to be above the fray and try to like know that like yes, I could feel like and see and acknowledge these things happening, and I can also simultaneously have a good life. And I was telling Meg, I actually would want more of us feeling that way, resourced, regulated, uh because it's what allows us to not run around with our chickens with the head cut off and be like, oh my god, more crisis and fire. And it that does not allow us to think outside the box creatively, to come up with solutions that really fix this long term, right? In order to do that, it does require that level of resourceness, financially, energetically, spiritually, communally, right? All of the resources. And when more of us are resourced and not kind of like caught up in the crisis, we're more effective that way. We're not rendered ineffective or unproductive. So to me, that's part of my role, to be honest, is to help resource these matriarchal leaders who have said yes, who have decided they're ready, so that you have the financial, the communal, the knowledge, right? Like all the resources, so that you can present solutions, so that we can help the changing of the guard, and do it with less strife and, suffering. So that's kind of like how I see it. So it's not this like, oh, the matriarch is the martyr, the Mother Teresa type, that I'm just going to self-sacrifice, and like the more I give of myself, the more noble it is. It's not noble to be poor. It's not noble to be under resourced. It renders us highly ineffective. So I think so much of the work for those of us that are being called is knowing, speaking of desire, speaking of knowing what you want, is know what you fucking want, and know your fucking lane, and know what is coming through you, because all of us are being called for different things. And that's the thing. We all have roles to play in all of this. Mine happens to look and emanate in this way. For Meg, it's different. For you that's watching, it's going to be different. But to know that, to receive that, to accept that, and to say yes to that is going to require you to be resourced as fuck. That way you are rendered most effective. And this is how we really usher in that changing of the guard.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's been a really activating journey for me to step into being more resourced.
Mm-hmm.
It did not feel good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yet there was a call, because I found myself continuously being in a stop and drop mode with crisis, and that it just kept perpetuating. And it really has taken a series of generative interruptions to that, relational interruptions that showed me not just the fruit, but the labor. And I love that I'm connecting that part of this conversation with this piece, because I come from deep intergenerational poverty, and like people who were like really like barely hanging on. Culturally, but like physically, and in all of those ways. And it has been a very curious, long game, low and slow unfolding into a more generous reality that doesn't just resource me. It really actually is a resourcing across the board with anyone who's walking beside me, that these shapes are shareable, and that I'm finding as I'm more resourced, I'm able to actually more potently companion where there's vulnerability, financial vulnerability, or otherwise, like community vulnerability, which is a big part of my work. I think a lot of this is deeply connected to community vulnerability, because communities are really wealthy together. You have a lot of resources when people can come together. Again, to me, destiny is cohort. You just touched on that, of like, the way any of us would respond to the call for resource is going to be different, because we each have different needs for resource. Like for me to be really resourced is not necessarily, it's not the same as, Jeff Bezos. Like it's not the same. It's probably not the same as you. Like for me to be really well resourced looks very, very different. But if I'm not always scavenging, which I found myself doing, then I have bandwidth for creating more novel solutions to crisis. And I know all about crisis personally. Yeah. And to have creative bandwidth that actually has impact. There's so much that's connected with this. Like the title of this live is like capital and consciousness, and I forget the other word. But like culture. They're all like, it's all they're interlocking.
Yeah.
We're coming close to the end of this call, which is cool because there's so much more to talk about. And if you are interested in Drea's work, there are ways for you to plug in. We'll get into that in a minute. And I'll probably invite her back to have a part 2. But I would love briefly, is there anything that you would have to say about what practice is for you? Like what does it mean to practice or to be in practice for you?
Yeah. I love that word. I love the word practice. You and I were talking about this idea of sometimes we're kind of given this idea that we've arrived. And speaking specifically around like leadership, matriarchal leadership, there is no arriving. There is no like, great, perfect, I've graduated, I'm a matriarch now. Just like how like, you know, my grandmother, the matriarch that I was kind of like, I watched her growing up, we'd have like people, like our door was just like constantly open. There was always people coming in asking her for advice, and you know, whether it's like because of the family or like money, or she was an entrepreneur as well, she was a businesswoman, so like she had so many different like areas of expertise that she could like give of herself. But like every day was different. Every day was presented a new person with a new problem or crisis or whatever. And so that was like a practice for her, and it's what allowed her to really shape the shape of a matriarch that she thought she would be, that she was going to be. Mine is a different shape altogether. It's different now. That's why I like using more the term like the modern matriarch, because it's a little bit more relevant to our times now. But to me, practice gets to be the day-to-day of moving through crisis, through problems, through joys, through celebrations, through disappointments, through frustrations, and moving through all of it. And that is the quote, the labor that eventually like bears the fruit, the practice, the day-to-day acceptance, receiving of I get to practice this, whether it's a craft, whether it's your business acumen, whether it's your financial muscles, it gets to be,
Or tomato break.
or tomato break,
Yeah.
right? The sabbaticals, the slowing down, the I will sit in my matriarchal chair and really receive that my body can't do much right now, right? All of that gets to be the mosaic, the tapestry that creates ultimately whatever result that we're working towards. So that the practice, I think, is like just it's the lived wisdom, and it's the true everyday practice. Yeah.
Oh, it's the lived wisdom. Yeah, that. Yeah. Is there a practice that you would invite us to consider? Anyone who's watching?
I would probably, because of the topic that we're in, the practice gets to be, how can I more embody the matriarch today? Gets to be a question. And this you could take anywhere. There's so many different flavors to this, and we touched on so many different topics. So it could be on the rest side of things. How can I be embodied in my rested matriarch self today? It could be how can I embody the matriarch in saying yes to the larger vision? It could be how can I embody the matriarch in being more resourced? So perhaps it's a simple question, but it can be a channel and a portal for much larger information that comes through.
Oh, I love a good question.
Yes. Yeah.
I love a good question that like leads to like embodied or actionable response.
Mhm.
And that keeps us present in that way, where it's not just an intellectual musing, but like like a self-initiated invitation around like more embodiment. And I
Mhm.
really feel that like how do I embody the matriarch today? Like, how do I,
Mhm.
like, what would WWMD, what would matriarch do?
Seriously, yeah.
It's interesting because I didn't have that consciously. I wasn't asking myself consciously, but I've been finding myself essentially asking that question. And it has been turning how I'm responding to things. I'm feeling like there's a seatedness. A little story about I'm going to share this here because it's like perfect. A little story about going to Drea's Stellium birth party, launch party. Um, I was in a room of mostly people I didn't know. I knew another beloved who I believe is watching the live right now, and Drea. And I've sort of abstractly knew from the internet, like a few other people. And historically, it would be a moment where I might like slip out if I felt like, oh, I'm just kind of standing here. Like I may have historically slipped out.
Mhm.
Um, And in those contexts, that would have been fine because I wasn't there to like do the labor of expansion, like in another kind of party context, I would be there to like be with my capacity and then to leave when it was time to leave. In this particular party, I was there to expand my capacity. And I had about 2 minutes where I felt like obviously awkward. Even the bartender who I had developed like a sweet sort of circuit of humor with kind of looked at me like, what are you going to do with that? I'm like, I'm going to stand here, Dylan. Like, I'm going to stand
Yeah.
here. And I did. I stood and I just stood there and I watched people interacting. I didn't have a need to make small talk or like to inject myself into another spot because I asked myself essentially, like, how do I want to be here? Do I want to like hustle or foist or interject, or do I want to stand here? I want to stand here. Okay. And then I saw that there's this one chair that had like leather batting, like it like was throne-ish.
Yeah, yeah, the room,
And
yeah.
like everything else was like, it was like a wooden box, it was like a square, it was like a couch or whatever. And then there was this like chair, and I was like, it's the chair, it's the throne. And I like it was like, I'm gonna sit on the throne. And I just sat on the throne and it was facing out, kind of away from all of the people. And within moments, a bunch of people surrounded me and I was enveloped in conversation. And I noted that because I was in my
Mhm.
process. It's not like I feel perfectly cool standing here in this room watching a bunch of people have conversations. Like I had to go through the activation. I had to like recognize it. I had to make a choice. There wasn't really a wrong choice, but there was a choice that like leaned me in a little bit more. This is a really simple everyday story, basically, aside from the fact that I was at a cocktail party. But like, I feel like I experience this arc all the time. And instead of moving from the awkwardness or moving from the activation, I moved into sovereignty. I kind of like moved into a centeredness and then made decisions from there. And then people came to me and I was like, this is the life I want. I want to like, I want to be seated in myself and I want
Yeah,
people to come to me.
yes.
The
So
end.
I first of all, I saw you when that moment happened.
Oh my God.
I saw you, and if I was not in my matriarch, I would have come over and be like, "Oh my god, are you okay?" You know what I mean? I would have over catered,
Hmm. Didn't
but I
need
was
it.
like,
Didn't
"She'll be
want
fine." Yeah, I was
it.
like,
Yeah.
"She'll be fine. Let her sit in the chair." What I will say, it's very egg energy. We talked
Yes.
about this. I think conventional biology teach or like conventional academia teaches that like it's the sperm, like it's survival of the fittest, like whoever like gets to the egg first or like penetrates for or whatever, right? But I think like the research, and I think like this is like true wisdom, shamanic wisdom, is that like it's not the sperm, it's the egg. It's the egg that chooses the sperm. And so you were
It actually
very
decapitates anything
energy.
that's
Yeah, you are very egg energy in that, and this is matriarchal energy. It's very much like we're gonna sit in the throne, and I'm gonna allow great things to come to me, and I'm going to allow the conversations to come to me, and I'm going to allow the people to crowd around me. It's a receptivity, it's a frequency of like I receive, and there's a knowingness and assuredness. We were playing with the word reassurance. There's an assuredness, felt sense of assuredness that like when I sit here, it's going to be fine and people are going to come to me. And I think that is exactly that. It's a very regal, it's quiet, but it's very visceral, it's very potent.
Yeah.
That is like matriarchal energy.
And it was so cool to experience myself in that pivot, to like have an awareness, and yeah, to feel that conversion is the word that's really here. Like that was a converting moment for me in which and it lasts. This is one of the things you said earlier in this call, and this is a thing I have experienced. When I received it, I became it. Like it's not really going to wobble. It's not like I'm not going to experience that awkward edge again, but that baseline has been established in which like I actually became the choice to sit in the throne and to let good things come to me, instead of hustling. Because I was watching a beautiful room of beautiful people in all kinds of different energies. And I was like, okay, like I'm experiencing some like biological thing because I'm in a room of people I don't know. Okay. Like it doesn't need to mean more than that. It just was like a thing I noticed. Like it didn't mean anything about me, but it did give me an opportunity to lean into something that I was there to lean into. And it was just so cool that I did. And I can like celebrate it. I'm like, I sat in the chair, good things came to me. I didn't need to decapitate any unwelcomed or like undesirable sperm. Like
exactly.
Yeah, I actually had a friend years ago say, "Be the ovum," and I was like, "I love that.
Love
Be
that.
the ovum." Yeah. And there are times to act. There are times to like be in that masculine energy. That's part of what we've talked about today. Matriarchal energy for me isn't about the polarity. It is actually about the integration. Like there's an access to a full spectrum that includes sustainability, awareness of impact, stewardship, like all of those pieces, and also strategy and direct action. That matriarchal energy is not relegated to female or feminine or femme identifying. I know a lot of men who are matriarchal. My husband's matriarchal, like really deep steward of awareness. And yeah, and it's not relegated to just reception, but it's cool when we can like support that reception. That allows things to come from the ineffable. This is my body at work of imagination. I'm like, that reception allows the ineffable to come through us through the technology of imagination into form and can create ripples that change the course because things become available when they weren't previously available. How powerful. Anyway, we are past time and I have to hop off. Is there anything that you would like to promote for any, and any invitations that you have for folks who are here?
Yeah, I am, like I mentioned, in a season of going to be going into cave mode soon, but the work doesn't end. I shall be back, but until then, the most direct way to work with me is through private advisory or intensive. So this could look like a weekend intensive, either virtually or in person, long-term partnerships. But I also do brand shoots. So talking about brand and talking about elevation and aesthetics and visuals. I part of the Stellium house, we have a room that is the studio, which is a somatic brand studio, which is really using the wisdom of the body in order to get a better understanding of what the optical form of your essence is. It's a really cool process because, and I feel like a lot of us are shifting and sure, whatever, I'll call it rebranding. It's much deeper than that. But basically, if you're in that moment where you feel like you want an elevation, you're calling in greater visibility, We're kind of, upgrading some operating systems. Your brand can be a great place to start. It's not just the end result, which is sure, beautiful photos. At the end of the day, it's also a portal. And Meg can attest to this, but like folks that go through these kinds of brand shoots, it's not just like, okay, like pose and look cute and all of that, but it really is asking you to be in the body of the thing that you're calling in. And so you often leave feeling and looking like a different person. And of course, we have now beautiful images that capture that. So between the private work with me, and this is on either on the business side, if you are a founder or business owner, on the leadership side, if work corporate or don't have a business of your own, but want the partnership, the oracular advisory, that's something that I offer. And so while I will be taking a little bit of a break in order for me to be with my human child, it's still things that I'm scheduling for in the spring summer season. So those will be open. And the best way is to get a hold of me either on Instagram or my website, which is also you could find on Instagram if you click the link.
I can 100% attest to the fact that the brand shoots are just not brand shoots. It's
Magic.
deep medicine. Like I really experienced an embodiment of expanded self-concept being like infusing me and then moving like that, and it lasted. It has remained. So really powerful. Rad. A couple of announcements on my end. I have a seat open in Soul Friend because we have a bit of an opening for a retreat in February, a virtual retreat, and another person has joined. And so there's a seat if you're seeking to step into companionship in the lineage of spiritual direction. This program is a really wonderful way to be in a formational process and step into that. The Field Keeper Lab in February is going to be a death of the old self. We're going to have a funeral. So if you want to have a creative living funeral for old identities that you've outgrown, come on in, because it'll be a party in a mortuary kind of way.
Yeah.
Identity death. And the Archetype Playhouse was moved from, it would actually be right now. It would be this weekend. But a bunch of stuff happened last month, including my husband having a heart attack and moving to Arizona. So Archetype Playhouse got moved to May in Arizona, and it's going to be fire. And there's really actually only a couple of seats open because most of them are claimed. So if you're curious about stepping into expanded self-concept through imagination and play, and essentially skipping years of therapy by actually engaging the totality of your being with witness and in community, come play. It'll be potent. Next month's guest is Genuine Michael. We're going to get into faith and different expressions of what it looks like to have faith in the modern context. I'll share more about that soon. It's been such a pleasure to have you, Drea. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your channelings and just your presence, who you are here, and also in the more intimate circuits that you do the work that you're doing, because it's essential. It's really essential. It's been really profound to see my own shift and how that's being transmitted to anyone who's walking beside me. And I'm sure that's the case with everyone who's working with you. So thank you. And thanks for being here. Thank you all who are here live, who've joined us live, and you who are watching later. Catch you next time.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.